Hello, and welcome to The Wonders I've Seen, where there's no such thing as weird or normal, there's just different. I'm your host, Tanagra, and today we'll be discussing something a little bit different from my usual topics, BL, otherwise known as Boys Love, specifically Netflix's latest BL acquisition. They have some from various countries, but this one is from the Philippines, the drama Gameboys Level Up Edition. So grab your liquid nourishment, sit back, and enjoy the wonders.
I have never desired your good opinion.
People fear what they do not understand.
I have a headache, a badge, and a gun.
Power is yours.
Behave.
I was just trying to start a conversation.
And share the wonders I've seen.
My liquid nourishment for the day is PG Tips and Girl Scout cookies. Which ones, you ask? 4 different types, so I'm just not going to say them all. Support your local Girl Scouts. Also, why are the cookie boxes so small? Anyway, let's get into it. First things first, a little bit of explanation about BL. BL stands for Boys Love, which indicates a relationship between 2 male protagonists. The genre originated in Japanese manga and was later adapted into anime, which eventually led to live-action adaptations of mangas and anime, and ultimately independent shows and films that fall under the umbrella of BL. I say BL is about the relationship between male protagonists because there are subgenres. I'm not going to go into all of them, but for the purpose of this conversation, you should know what yaoi means, shonenai, and BL, just so you're not confused when you're listening. So yaoi, which looks like yaoi, which is how I pronounced it for a while because back in the day, the internet had no video and there was no YouTube. It's erotica and features sexually explicit scenes, usually between the 2 male protagonists or whoever else they might be happening to sleep with. There's usually a romance storyline throughout, but ultimately the point of yaoi, whether it's manga or anime, is the sex. Shonenai literally translate as boys love. It features a young male, or is the story of a group of men, usually very pretty or at the minimum aesthetically pleasing, dealing with love, but not necessarily love of a romantic nature. And while these relationships can be between 2 males, they could also be between a male and a female. However, these days, they're usually male-male when you hear shonenai, and they're usually grouped within the 3rd category, or with the 3rd category, boys love or BL. So BL as a whole originated in Japan, and it just meant male-male romance targeted towards female readers, and it was usually written by female authors. And it was a subgenre of romance fiction. When I was first exposed to BL back in the 90s, it was under this genre and within the scope. BL meant romance with 2 males. Yaoi was a very separate, and that might have predominantly been due to the fact that because the anime and the manga community were a lot smaller, you had to be more detailed about what you were looking for. Like, you learned very quickly back in the day that in the old internet, you didn't say yaoi when you wanted a sweet shonenai story with no sex in it. And that was also very difficult to find because given who was importing / illegally translating and uploading manga. But anyway, that's for another episode. So today, BL is used to encompass all male-male relationship stories outside of Japan, as it's basically the marketing term. In the international community, this can cause confusion as male-male doesn't indicate a specific genre, but it indicates genders. But seeing as all same-sex relationships are grouped together isn't a new thing in other countries or even in the States. It's why you see films and TV shows on streaming platforms or Google searches grouped as LGBTQIA+, rather than by an actual genre like romance, thriller, comedy, suspense. All this to say that when I'm using the term BL in this conversation to describe Gameboys, in essence, it's sort of incorrect, but I'm using it as the marketing term following marketing practices. Gameboys is actually a really sweet romance web series or a drama, a term that also means TV show, between 2 boys in their early 20s. I'm sorry, I should not say boys, I should say men, but when you reach my age, like 21, it's sort of boys. But yes, between 2 men in their early 20s. They're the new adult age, if I'm going to speak in novel terms. So, because BL was a genre originally written by Japanese women to process and speak out about their own social anxieties and treatment as women, the genre had some very troubling themes. Things such as sexual assault, rape, age gaps between lovers, which we now know is grooming, coercion, the quote-unquote female partner of the same-sex couple being the weaker one who needs protecting or saving. These were all common as Japanese women used manga to creatively deal with their fears and voice social critiques and anxieties. However, as the genre expanded outside of female writers and no longer focused on social commentary and sub-genres began to emerge, the controversial themes became commonplace tropes. So now, whether in BL manga, anime, or dramas, incidents of violent sexual assault, so-called dubcon, which is short for dubious or questionable consent, emotional abuse, and one man in the relationship always having to be turned the wife, this shit is rampant. And it is problematic. So I'm willing to discuss the misogyny that both internalized and perpetuated, since a lot of the writers of BL today are still women and they still uphold these issues. Also, the romanticization of assault, the anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, and also the forced heteronormativity of all of these tropes. But not today. That was such a mouthful. And I really don't want to talk about all of the problematic shit of this genre. You know, all of your faves are all questionable. Suffice it to say that if you don't like any of those things, but you enjoy same-sex romance, navigating what to watch and what to read of the works that are marketed under the banner of BL can be a minefield trying to avoid triggers and find things that are actually enjoyable and not questionable. So when you find a show that has none of these things, like zero of these elements, in addition to that is very pro-LGBTQIA, you share it with everyone. And that's why I'm making this episode about Gameboys Level Up Edition. Y'all, that's my heater. We've been over this. I live in New York. So this episode, unlike others, won't have any spoilers because I expect you all to go out and watch this show. Like immediately after you listen to this, if you can. Although if you have work, sleep, etc., I get that. But you get my drift. It's an amazing show. And it's so easily accessible. And if you have a problem with reading subtitles, get over it. All right, so Gameboys first premiered on YouTube as a BL web series from the Idea First Company in May of 2020. Now, the Netflix version is called Gameboys Level Up. Basically, they reshot some scenes and remastered the footage for a Netflix international release. The biggest change is that the first 2 YouTube episodes were combined into an episode 1 on Netflix. But otherwise, it's basically the same show that you could find. So you can watch it on Netflix or YouTube. I've watched both versions. They're both amazing. I love them both. So in spring of 2020, various cities in the Philippines were under lockdown, similar to the rest of the world. Filming couldn't take place in person, and the Philippines had checkpoints, so you couldn't just send a crew to a location, and there were strict social distancing rules. So even if you could get everyone to a set, they needed to be 6 feet plus apart, which means you can't do makeup. Lighting is difficult, and group scenes are almost impossible without a ridiculous amount of extra expense. You can see some shows have been trying to work around that if you watch television in the States, and you also see how well it is and is not working when they're trying to film in person rather than digitally. So against this background, in essence, all filming had stopped. And the Idea First Company came up with Gameboys, a web drama written by Ash N. Malamoon and directed by Ivan Andrew Payawal. So now Gameboys, my lovely Gameboys, is the story of Cairo, a gaming streamer, and Gavreel, his fan-turned-suitor. And I do mean suitor. This is one of the sweetest parts of the show. So when Gavreel confesses to Cairo how he feels, he first asks Cairo on a date, one for which Gavreel has food delivered to Cairo's house. He then asks Cairo if he can court him. So I think this is a cultural difference, because in the US we use the term dating to encompass everything. Dating means courting, it means casual dating, it means serious dating, it means friends with benefits. It means going out with your fiance. It means going out with your spouse. Basically, it means everything except one night stands. But I love the idea of someone asking me if they can court me. Like, yes, you may court me. You can send me food and check on me every day just because you think I'm cute. And yeah, okay, I have this with like friends and family, but it's different when it's like a romantic interest. So this is how our romance starts. And Gavreel begins courting Cairo, or Kai, in earnest, a few episodes in, and the story blossoms from there. The courtship is ridiculously cute, sweet, and sincere, but our couple doesn't get an immediate HEA. There aren't a lot of episodes in this series, but they go through everything from interfering friends, unwanted third parties, family issues, and of course the ever-looming threat of COVID are all trials that they have to face. And I won't tell you which ones they overcome and what happens. Once again, no spoilers. But you also should experience it because the emotional journey is ridiculously cathartic. So now one thing that the show does is an excellent job of using social media to tell the story not only of our OTP, our one true pairing, but of their friends, their family, and their lovers as well. If you're going to make a show online, it should be one that includes everything that online can offer, right? Don't act like you're still filming in person. And this show does that so well. In the first scene where we as the audience see social media, you see Cairo's social media, basically his Instagram. He's gaming, he's eating junk food, he's listening to music, and he's spending time with his family. So you see what he posts. Gab's social media, on the other hand, is him working out. He's going to Starbucks. Yes, they really are everywhere. He's modeling clothes and he's answering questions from his followers. The nonverbal storytelling and editing is brilliant. It's one of the things that, as a creative myself, I really loved about this show. And as an audience member, I really appreciate it. It instantly conveys the characters not only to the audience, but also to each other. There's almost an interactive element because every time the audience sees social media, it's the characters in the show scrolling social media, theirs or someone else's. So all the relevant writing and post is always translated or it's read through. So you know what you should be paying attention to so you can follow the story. And you don't miss anything if you don't understand Tagalog. Once again, just read the subtitles. But what's even more impressive is that all the filming was done by the actors. So we use the term talent in the US, and usually talent means they're really good at acting. It does not include things like lighting, set dressing, setting the camera. Those are all their own specialties, and those are all their own areas of expertise. Elijah Canlas and Cocoy de Santos, who played Cairo and Gavreel respectively, were already signed with the Idea First company as talent, so they didn't really have to audition for the roles. But because of COVID, all other pre-production and production was done by them being directed via webcam. So each actor took care of the lighting, the makeup, the wardrobe, the set dressing, and also setting the camera and the angles and even capturing the shots. And they were directed by the professional, the expert, over the internet. So imagine being in a Zoom call and being like, all right, action. And you're supposed to have your camera in the correct place and have your lighting in the correct place. And you're an actor, you've never done this before. And it's really impressive to watch. And you can see some of the behind the scenes on how they made this work on the official Idea First YouTube. And then also writer Malamoon post on his Twitter. So I previously mentioned that Gameboys doesn't have any of those dangerous BL tropes. And no, I'm not going to list them again. It does, however, deal, or rather not necessarily deal, but address being gay in the Philippines and coming out. No, there's no homophobia. There's no self-hate. Don't even have to worry about that. But there is a recognition of the discrimination that comes with being gay. Because while homosexuality, is not illegal in the Philippines, same-sex marriage is not allowed. And there are no protections against sexual identity discrimination. And so it's with this knowledge that our young OTP sort of meets and courts and goes into their relationship and through the relationships with their family members. So even though this is an uplifting romance, it's not completely lighthearted. I'm going to give you a warning for life circumstances in general dealing with COVID. As happy as this drama is, the way the pandemic fucked up everybody's lives, the way it took and continues to take lives, is central to the story of Gameboys. For example, even though Kai and Gav have cars, they can't visit each other because they don't have passes to each other's neighborhoods. One of them has a sick loved one in the hospital due to COVID. This drama also directly addresses the emotional toll of COVID and the toll of COVID lockdowns and solitude on one's mental health. It even touches on excessive drinking during COVID. And none of this is preachy. It's simply just reflective of what people in the Philippines, but in all honesty, people everywhere are going through, trying to deal with this. And all of this, I'm making a motion just to the world, to all of this, and with these reminders of the real world issues. However, the drama is still such a bright spot. Like, there's an excellent emotional balance struck between an almost fairy tale online romance and the grounded difficulties of everyday life of the past year. And yes, it is a year as I record this, and being in a relationship. But it sets a tone that leaves you hopeful for the real world, but not trying to escape it. And I think that's something that a lot of entertainment lately has not been able to do. Either it acts like COVID doesn't exist, or you're so focused on COVID that you don't really get to appreciate the other things. So in Tagalog, there's a word, kilig. Kilig refers to the feeling of excitement due to various love circumstances, such as making first eye contact with your crush, watching another person propose to someone, or the ever heart-pounding but rarely occurring illicit hand-holding. And if I'm saying kilig wrong, then please feel free to reach out to me and tell me how to pronounce it, because I had to go to various YouTube sources, and we know how those can be questionable. So maybe because Gameboys is written by an out and proud gay man, and it's the rare BL drama that is both LGBTQIA plus positive and also encompasses all of the romance tropes of BL, maybe it's because the Idea First team just created something that they wanted to see without all of those problematic tropes. They wanted to make something warm. Maybe it's because the cast and crew were so dedicated to creating something meaningful in these really shitty times. Like Elijah, who plays Cairo, his character has a family. The family of his character is his real life family, because they were aware of the dangers of COVID. So maybe it's things like that they were willing to step in front of the camera for this show. But Gameboys leveled up. It drops all the problematic BL tropes, and it just gives the audience a sweet, bright romance that captures kilig in the shitty time of COVID. So these days I stick predominantly to BL dramas and film. I rarely read BL manga anymore. I've started way too many mangas that seem great, and they're wonderful, and they're sweet, and they're cutesy, and then bam, there's some dubcon being sold as romance. And yes, it is so common in the genre that a lot of reviewers don't even mention it. Or it's, it doesn't happen that long, or eventually he says yes, which, like, we're not going to talk about consent right now. But if you listen to my thoughts on Bridgerton, I have a hard line on that. So I rarely read manga. Film and TV BL are easier to consume, and because of that, more people have watched them, so it's easier to find people who will call out those problematic tropes in different series and different films, or you can just ask me. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation about BL, and I do mean BL and the male-male romance fiction definition, with the HEA, Nope, I haven't read any that don't have a HEA. Because it's COVID. There's enough unhappy things. So, yes, BL and the male-male romance fiction with a HEA. Or if you just want to gush about Gameboys, either version, or any other BLs, then you can find me on Twitter at Tanagra GGNOC. That's TANAGRAGGNOC. This offer is also out there for fans of Chinese male fiction shows / movies marketed as bromance due to censorship reasons. Shout out to my Untamed and Guardian fans. So yes, you can also find me. For all you Android users, you can find us on Anchor and RadioPublic. And for all you iTunes users, you can listen in on iTunes and Overcast. You can also listen to us on YouTube. So leave us a message on some platform, suggest a show, suggest a movie, ask a question about BL, ask me why there isn't more GL. Really, ask me. I want to know too. Let's discuss. Thanks for joining. Make choices and don't fall it up.